Hi there. My name is Derek, and you're listening to the Hellenistic Age Podcast, Episode 0, Beginning at the End. The scene is set in the city of Alexandria in Egypt, often thought to be the most beautiful and sophisticated in the world, at least the Mediterranean world of 30 BC. Cleopatra VII Philopator, the last queen of Egypt and the last ruling member of her house, lay dead in her palace at the age of 39 years. Her death, romanticized and brought to popular culture by the likes of artists such as William Shakespeare and others too innumerable to count, and her legendary romantic escapades with the likes of Mark Antony and Julius Caesar, are often what comes to mind when people think of the name Cleopatra. Those a bit more invested in history often viewed in the context of the collapse of the Roman Republic and the rise of the Roman Empire under Antony and Cleopatra's rival, Octavian Caesar, better known as Augustus, who would assume the title of princeps and absorb Egypt as a Roman province only a few years later. I have to admit, I myself was prone to this line of thinking, and while it isn't incorrect to view her death in such a manner, it often doesn't get the whole picture. Cleopatra's death not only marks the end of the Roman Republic, but it also marks the end of her royal house and a world order that stretched back some 300 years prior. She was of a line of rulers known as the Ptolemies, founded by a Macedonian general known as Ptolemy son of Lagus, who had served under the banner of the greatest king Macedon ever produced, Alexander the Great. Her death is often considered the end of what scholars like to call the Hellenistic Age. But what exactly is the Hellenistic Age? Traditionally, what we classify as the Hellenistic Age is an artificial grouping of a period of history covering the lands of Eurasia and North Africa from 323 to 30 BC, from the campaigns and death of Alexander the Great to the subsequent demise of the House of Ptolemy, the last of the kingdoms carved from Alexander's empire. The term Hellenistic was coined in the 19th century by the German historian Johann Gustav Droysen, the same thinker who pioneered the now debunked concept of the great man theory. Hellenistic is a modern amalgamation of Hellene or Hellenist, the terms the ancient Greeks used to describe those who spoke the Greek language, and is used to approximately mean Greek-like. This refers to when ancient Greek culture, such as its sciences, arts, and philosophies, was spread out and disseminated across much of the known world, carried and propagated by the Macedonian conquerors and kings who settled from Egypt as far east as the borders of modern India. This concept has certainly had its challengers from various historians, classicists, and scholars over the decades. Traditionally, it was viewed that Alexander's conquest had allowed for the spread of the superior intellectual and cultural traditions of the classical Greeks over a variety of backwards and barbaric peoples. Alternatively, some traditions have labeled the Hellenistic Age as one of decadence, the snuffing of democratic ideals of Athens in favor of despotic and proto-colonialist rule by kings who squabbled over each other's realms for piecemeal territories, and that the Hellenistic kingdoms were just stepping stones for the rise of the Roman Republican Empire. Both of these views have largely been discarded, thanks to an amazing body of work done in the last 30 years by archaeologists, scholars, and authors. The Hellenistic period was a time of great intellectual and cultural flourishing, marked by developments of technology and art on a scale hitherto unknown, and despite the often savage fighting that took place between the rival competitor kingdoms. It also wasn't just a one-way street in regards to cultural exchange. The subject populations of the Greco-Macedonian rulers, peoples such as Persians, Egyptians, Bactrians, Jews, Celts, all carried their own rich traditions and beliefs which were adopted into Greek culture and vice versa. For instance, while the landscape of Afghanistan was peppered with Greek-styled cities containing sights and sounds that would not be dissimilar from that of classical Athens, many Greeks, both royal and common, would adopt Buddhism while living in India, and the Ptolemies would patronize and imitate the gods of the Egyptian pantheon in the form of semi-divine kingship and artistic iconography. Some scholars have opted to change the term Hellenistic, given the organic adaptation of human culture and beliefs, and change it to the Macedonian centuries. I think that the Hellenistic Age is a perfectly sufficient enough description, and it's more well known, so I will continue to use this term, but extrapolate and explain when I need to. Although I am not a scholar, nor am I a historian, But as someone with a passion for the history of the ancient world and the classics, I envision this podcast as a way to teach myself about a period of time that I was woefully unfamiliar with, and as a way to educate and entertain a wide variety of listeners. This podcast will cover a time span of some 300 years and 5,000 miles, with a geographic range stretching from the Straits of Gibraltar to the mountains of the Hindu Kush and then some. The Hellenistic period is host to some of history's most famous and colorful characters: Alexander the Great, Cleopatra VII, and Julius Caesar. It is also filled to the brim with lesser-known and just as interesting figures like Menander I, a Greek king who conquered and established a kingdom in modern India before becoming a convert to Buddhism, ending up as a revered figure in the Buddhist tradition afterwards. There's also Queen Cleopatra Thea, whose political ambition led her to move from Ptolemaic princess to queen of the Seleucid Empire, outlasting 3 successive husbands before dying in her attempts to plot against her own son. We won't be limited to just focusing on the big players either, though an overall narrative thread of the political landscape is what I will base much of the show on. From time to time, I will dedicate episodes to the developments in the realms, arts, and sciences of war and religion. I want to take time to see what life was like for those who lived and died in the Hellenistic Age, whether they were a settler or a scientist, a mercenary or a merchant, a princess or a peasant, whether in Roman Italy or Mauryan India. From the Punic Wars to the Greco-Bactrian kingdoms, from the wars of the Diadohoi to the fall of the Ptolemaic dynasty, I hope that all I've laid out before you has at least sparked curiosity towards my show. If you are interested, consider checking out my prologue episodes on the world before Alexander the Great, or you can visit my website at hellenisticagepodcast.wordpress.com, where you will find links to all of my episodes, including family trees, bibliographies, helpful episode notes, and more. So, until next time, welcome to the Hellenistic Age Podcast.